Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, December 27th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live to tape steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, it is our famous best ofs of the year. So it's, even though you know it's
Hump Day.
Yes, Hump Day. This is it's a different type of hump day because we're not here, so it's not.
There's no hump to get over.
There's no hump to get over.
Except for maybe, the hangovers that you may have had from Christmas. Whoa.
Folks on the, jeez, it's really abrupt. You can, I don't know the word fade, Bradley.
Bradley
folks,
has a heavy hand.
We've got a great show for you today. Back in January 5th, 2023, we can about go as far as you can in this year. It could have been one of our first shows of 2023. We interviewed Clara Mattei. She's assistant professor of economics at the New School for Social Research, and she wrote a book called The Capital Order: How Economists Invented Austerity and Paved the Way to Fascism. One of the themes of this program over the years has been how economics is not some type of science that exists in nature. There are some economic rules, but some very fundamental ones that that are probably a lot more like sophisticated and intricate and complicated than we presume they are, and subject to a lot more of environmental things. But the bottom line is our economy does not exist in a vacuum. It is a series of choices that we make. And austerity is one of the choices that we make that doesn't necessarily, the purpose of austerity is not what we are sold as it being. And I'll let the professor handle that. But also, we've got a lot of, on this show today, it's crazy. You interviewed these guys.
Yeah, everyone knows Blowback. They should at this point. The
I've
podcast.
listened to half of these episodes so far. I got to listen to more, but
yeah, it's a good opportunity because now they're released essentially on all podcast platforms. You can go and support Blowback if you'd like. They do incredible work, but now they're available on Apple and Spotify, I believe. When I did this interview with them, it was just coming out behind the paywall. But they do an amazing job deep diving into the United States' relationship with Afghanistan and what the history is behind the 20-year involvement that Biden actually got us out of. I guess now 2 years at this point? 2 years ago, we withdrew troops from Afghanistan, and Noah and Brendan are incredibly well researched and give a very clear-eyed view of what U.S. empire really looks like. And so we talk about Afghanistan in particular here, but you can check out their other seasons where they go into Korea and Iraq.
I know they're going to do Turkey, I think, is that
They said next up is Cambodia.
Oh, Cambodia. Okay.
In the spirit of Kissinger. So they're probably researching that now. You can check out that interview in a second.
And then following that, because it's a late Christmas gift, early New Year's gift, really late Hanukkah gift, Judy Gold from back in February of 2023, talking about George Santos. And I wonder, I haven't re-listened to this, but I wonder if it was predicted that George Santos would not make it through the year. But Judy Gold, of course. And, here's the thing about this episode with Judy Gold. she was so measured.
Oh, yes.
She was so
Relaxed.
measured, so relaxed. It was really
She
impressive.
should fill in for Sam Harris's meditation.
Oh my God, that would be hilarious. So we will get to those in just a moment. But first, I've got a ad to read. Folks, this is the time of the year where people make donations. And when you go and, make any type of like big purchase or something like that, car, air conditioner, I don't know, pan. If you're like me, what you do is you go to a review site and you look at like 20 different reviews, and then you talk to a bunch of people, and then but what do you do if you want to donate money and actually help people and make sure that you're donating to a charity that is really going to have some type of impact? Well, for me, I go to GiveWell. We've been talking about GiveWell for years now, and I found some of the charities I still support. I found them through GiveWell. GiveWell has spent over 15 years researching charitable organizations. Now they only direct funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they found in global health and poverty alleviation. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of a million more. And GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. And it's not just free for you, it is free for the charities. You make a tax-deductible donation to their recommended funds, which disperse it to several charities, or you make them directly to the charities through the GiveWell portal, and GiveWell doesn't even take a cut. They do this because the original funders basically just wanted a way to make sure that the money that was donated was going dollar for dollar to the highest impact possible. For me, they have one of the 4 charities that they recommend this year is one where you pay directly to families in other countries that are in deep poverty to vaccinate their children. And so for me, it's a twofer. One, you're obviously improving the health of these children. You're making sure that they get vaccinated. You're making it possible for the families, worthwhile for the families to vaccinate. And all the research I've read says giving people money directly is the best way to alleviate extreme poverty. And so for me, that's the one I like. There's some other ones that involve like malaria nets and bed nets. Like $5 for a bed net, and can reduce the number of malaria infections, which is a huge killer of adults and children in really desperately low income countries. They also do vitamin A supplements. Costs about $1 to deliver a vitamin A supplement to a child. Vitamin A deficiency can increase mortality rates. Vitamin A distributions can save a life by reducing vitamin A deficiency. So check out these charities. If you've never donated through GiveWell before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. This is a great place. And one of the other things I should say I love about GiveWell is that they will break down their history of what charities they have pointed people towards, and also the mistakes that they've made in making assessments, or flaws in their assessments. It's really more often than not they forgot to put up this information or something like that, but they're very, very transparent organization. Like I say, you can claim your match up to $100. Go to givewell.org, pick podcast, enter the Majority Report with Sam Seder at checkout. That way they'll know that you heard about them from us. GiveWell. Hit pick podcast, choose the Majority Report, and you will get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. We will put the link in our podcast and YouTube description. And now those 3 interviews, the first from Clara Mattei on the how economists invented austerity and paved the way to fascism. Then Emma's interview with Noah Kulwin and Brendan James on Blowback. That's from September. And then Judy Gold from the beginning of the year, talking about George Santos in the most measured of ways.
As always.
Enjoy. We'll see you tomorrow. Joining me, Clara Mattei, She is assistant professor of economics at the New School for Social Research, author of The Capital Order, How Economists Invented Austerity and Paved the Way to Fascism. Clara, thanks so much for joining us.
Here it is. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Okay, now I want to start with something that is not about the book necessarily, but I think it gives an analogy as to what the argument you're making in the book, which is you refer to yourself as a political economist. We refer to some people as political economists, and then just other people as economists. But aren't all economists really political economists?
This is a great point, and it is one of the main themes of the Capital Order, is to make obvious to common people who aren't necessarily economists themselves how economics as a discipline is deeply political. And because the very lens you use to look at the world shows you a world that can be in one way or another, and thus also gives you different solutions. So economic models profoundly shape the way we see society, we understand society's problems, and especially economics has been internalized even if we are not aware of it. A lot of values, the fact, for example, that if we're poor, we are ashamed of it. If we look at someone who's rich, we think that he has deserved it. All of these social values and norms are actually spread by economic models that kind of assume certain very classist assumptions. And here is the critique in the Capital Orders to see how the mainstream economics that we are used to reading at school, learning on a textbook as something neutral and given and the only theory possible, is actually something that has enormous political implications. So yes, all economics is political economy, but some strands in economics admit their political embeddedness. Others, the mainstream, the dominant framework, prefers to pretend they're apolitical, but this is a very powerful move so as to impose a very classist view of the world upon all of us through austerity measures.
Right. It's an attempt to obscure the fact that we're making choices and that the economy does not exist like the weather. And it is not a question of, well, it's raining, we've got to wear, we got to bring an umbrella out there. It's in fact, it's raining because we set it up to rain in some fashions, or we are contending that the rain is actually happening and therefore we need an umbrella. I mean, I don't want to belabor that too much. I'm also struck, and we'll circle around to this, but your book endeavors to sort of expose the premise to austerity as a solution to a problem that in many respects, again, is a choice. And what is amazing about the timing of your book is that it feels to me that Jay Powell, the chair of the Fed, has sort of, after 100 years, given up the ghost and admitted that his policies, and we'll circle back around to that. But let's just start, because what you do is you trace the history of the development of austerity as a policy choice, and specifically in the context of England and Italy. But before we get there, let's talk about the what you call the Trinity of austerity, the three elements that, or I guess, aspects of austerity, how they play out in our economics.
Yes, definitely. So you pointed to a very crucial point of the Capital Order, is to say that austerity is depicted as a necessity, as the only way forward, but it is actually the most political choice of all in order to build the false understanding that we live in the only way that is possible for humans to live, which is in a capitalist economy, right? So austerity as the protector of capitalism, and when we talk about capitalism, we mean the socioeconomic system we're under, by which the majority of us takes as a given and as a necessity to go work for a very low wage and in precarious conditions in order to make a living. So the fact that we depend on the market for our survival, the fact that to eat, to sleep, to go to school, to get medicine. We have to go and sell our labor power in return for a very low wage. Well, this is exactly what austerity is aiming to protect. This is the reason for the title of the book, The Capital Order. Capital, meaning the wealth that our society produces, presupposes capital as the social relation by which we all accept our condition as wage workers. And this is something that, again, austerity builds as a necessity. But what the book discovers is that if we look at what was happening 100 years ago, we see something that, again, incredibly is so obvious today, which is that in moment of social upheaval, in moment in which people are saying, no, we are sick of actually our conditions, of not being able to get to the end of a month and being so precarious in our livelihoods, in moments in which people want to participate in economic decisions to make a change, a radical one, well, it is in this moment that austerity is crucial in order to defeat any alternatives to the current status quo. So what is austerity? Austerity is fundamentally a trinity of policies that work together to silence working people. And what are these policies? Well, fiscal austerity is about cutting the social part of the budget. So cutting welfare measures. So cutting benefits, unemployment benefits, housing benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, so on and so forth.
That is when we hear politicians say shared sacrifice. I mean, and really what they're talking about is shared sacrifice, but really shared amongst 95% of us type of situation.
Yeah, because the idea is that we got to cut to pay back the debt. Well, guess what happens? When you cut, you're not cutting on the military, you're cutting on the social services, and you are also cutting in order to give money to the creditors of our society, which are the 1%, these international financial elites, by the way, not even necessarily, part of Americans themselves. So that's fiscal austerity in the forms of cuts in the social budget. Then we have fiscal austerity in the form of where does the state take money from? And the idea is that fiscal austerity is about taxing the poor more than taxing the rich. And a fancy word is regressive taxation. The fact that actually, while the state decides to cut the top income brackets, cut corporate taxes, at the same time, it's increasing consumption taxes, which is what hits us all in the same way. So it's important to recognize that during Eisenhower's time, the top income bracket was 91%. And right now, we are actually at a top income bracket that is less than 37% in 2021. So that actually, at the current moment, the richest 400 families in the United States pay a lower overall tax rate than any other income group. So it's quite astonishing the amount of regressive taxation that is structural to the American economy. And there's plenty of research on this.
And we should just, I love to to remind people of the statistic. Every dollar over $470,000 during Eisenhower time would have been taxed 90 cents on that dollar. Over that amount, that would have been $3 million today. Every dollar over $3 million that you earned would be taxed about 90%. People can argue as to what the effective tax rate was. The effective tax rate was still even maybe 20% more than the highest stated tax rate today. So regardless, the level of taxation at that time was much greater, leading into what they call the Great Expansion or compression, I guess. But I'm sorry, continue.
And the idea there is, of course, that taxation in a progressive sense would have been about redistributing resources from the few to the many. What austerity is all about is exactly the opposite. It's about shifting resources or extracting resources from the majority of Americans or people everywhere else in the world to the very tiny minority who benefits, right? Even we know that the corporate taxes were cut by Trump from 35% to 21%. So even corporations basically pay very little taxes. So this is fiscal austerity. Then we have monetary austerity. And monetary austerity is what, well, we've been seeing for the last 6 months at least, which is what? Huge increases, unprecedented increases in interest rates. So the fact that money is becoming dearer. What does this mean? Well, it means, A, that for the normal household, it's much more expensive to take on credit, because we know that Americans actually live on credit because wages are so low. So now it's more expensive to actually take on a mortgage or whatnot. Secondly, it means that these increases in interest rates are intentionally slowing down the economy because it's also more expensive to borrow in order to invest. So what we see right now is that the American economy is slowly slowing down, which means that unemployment is increasing. Layoffs are increasing. And this is not the outcome of bad theory that doesn't understand what it's doing. It's actually purposefully so that someone like Jerome Powell admits that in order to curtail inflation, we need to get rid of this tight labor market, meaning that we need to get rid of the fact that in the last year, actually workers have been doing pretty well in their bargaining power with their employees, because actually nominal wages have gone up and a lot of people have actually refused to go back to work, which means that there's much more labor demand than labor supply. So this was a very favorable moment for workers because, now I don't have the statistics with me here, but it's actually, now I think there's actually 2 job openings for every unemployed person. And it used to be just 10 years ago that there were 4 people competing for 1 job. So actually remember, but this is actually pretty impressive to give you a sense of how tight and robust the labor market is.
And,
so what
we're seeing this in the context of labor actions around the country and whatnot. And we should also say, and I don't want to go off too much on a tangent here, but Powell is claiming that the implication is, and because he's been explicit, we need to weaken labor. I don't know exactly what his words have been, but I'm paraphrasing, but not by much. I mean, he has literally said we need to weaken the labor market, and we should note though that the inflation that we have seen has outpaced wage growth to this point, which means that this is not his solution is a solution to something that is not necessarily the problem that he claims. And I think there is like widespread understanding that on some level too, what we're seeing is inflation, not as a function of overheated demand per se, but mismatched demand and supply because we had we had COVID and it screwed up our supply lines and whatnot. But he's going in there and this is not even this is about weakening labor. Period. End of story for him, which is not really the problem that we supposedly have. And your part of your argument ultimately is that this is not an irrational response. It's only irrational if you assume that they're trying to fix something that the inflation, as opposed to they're trying to fix an imbalance that they see between labor and capital.
Absolutely. So here is really where we see how timely the historical reconstruction is. It's because as it was 100 years ago, experts today, such as Powell, are being very explicit about the purpose of austerity in the form, for example, of higher interest rates. The purpose is to discipline workers into going back to their low-paid jobs. And this, they say very explicitly. They're saying the labor market is too robust. Someone like Larry Summers is telling us explicitly, in order for our economy to run smoothly again, we need a higher unemployment rate. We need to go even to 7% unemployment rate. Now it's too low. So clearly, when we see that inflation, and there's a lot of discussion about where inflation comes from, right? And many economists tell us that inflation is actually all due to markups on profits. So if you read someone like Robert Reich, someone like Rick Wolf, they're telling us actually inflation is due to the opposite problem. It's not too much purchasing power of the people, but it's actually too much political power in the hands of the few who actually decide on what prices to give to goods and commodities. So the thing here is that, as you pointed out very explicitly, is that there's a pretense that inflation is a technical problem that has to be resolved with the technical solution of increasing the interest rates. But really what is obvious is that inflation is an incredibly political problem. Why? Because inflation triggers discontent. People get upset. People realize that the system is not as efficient as it claims, that the market mechanism, the fact that our relations are mediated by money, which is unstable, might not be the best of possible world. Thus, the ideology of the best and only possible system is breaking down. In this moment, workers get more upset, of course, because their purchasing power goes down. Thus, we see how all the labor unrest in the United States at the moment, there's hundreds of strikes going on. There's this great labor tracker from Cornell University, Labor Action Tracker, that really shows real time how many workers are actually on the picket line today. This is due also to the fact that inflation is triggering this motion towards greater militancy. Well, this is the real problem that austerity is solving, and that economists and experts are so energetically pushing for, is we gotta go back to people to accept our class society as the only possible world without any form of complaint. And this is why we need higher unemployment, and this is exactly the purpose that this sacrifice, which is clearly not collective, of increasing the interest rate is doing.
All right, now, and I want to go back and circle back to your work, the historical aspect of this, which I think really is explicit. In fact, like, I'm not even as convinced that inflation in and of itself is the primary driver of the worker discontent in this country, right in this particular era. I think there's a whole host of other things, including like COVID just made people realize, like, hey, wait a second, why am I going out there and putting myself on the line to get a disease that has killed now over 1 million people in this country, well over 1 million people, for these wages before even inflation hit? I think there was a growing discontent and a broader discontent. And we should also say, before we go back to the history, up until, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, there was this we were to accept this as a law of nature, that the lowest amount of unemployment you could have in a functioning economy was like 6%. There was like, it was theoretically, we were told, impossible to have 3% unemployment, because if you did, the entire economy would fall apart. And of course, everybody believed this in the same way that, like, I guess at one point, everybody believed the world was flat. And then all of a sudden the ship just goes around and you see it on the horizon, and okay, now we just pretend like that never happened. And I think your argument is that austerity is a similar sort of like fiction that we have all just come to accept is a response to a economic law. But in fact, all of this stuff has been constructed. So let's go back to where you found evidence of this, at its nascent, I guess, at its birth, which was in the World War I or the post World War I era.
Yes. Definitely. Before I do that, I just wanted to mention, for the sake of completeness, the third element in the austerity trinity, fiscal, monetary austerity, is also industrial austerity, which really points to the fact that you were pointing out, the fact that inflation is just a trigger to this discontent that comes from the fact that industrial austerity, in the form of constant privatization, constant attacks on organized labor deregulation, so the fact that now there's precariousness all over the place, these, of course, are elements that increase our dependence on the market, but also boost the miserable conditions we're all in, which is one of the factors I think that people are, as you say, rebelling against in more organized way through strikes, but also in more spontaneous way through these anti-work movements that have really led the Great Resignation as a real phenomenon that has freaked out leading economists. Why is it freaking out? Well, again, because the claim here is that austerity is no mistake. Austerity is structural to capitalism because it is the main protector of capital as the social relation by which we accept our condition as wage workers. Now, austerity is structural, but austerity became visible in a specific historical moment. So here I go back to the history that you were asking me about. Austerity emerges after the Great War. The Great War was 1914-1918, a moment of explosive change for the market economy until that moment, that with the state basically breaching its boundaries of action, the war economy meant collectivizing production and the state becoming the main employer. I look at specifically Europe, the hub of where the Great War happened, and also at two countries that were in the West, Italy and Britain, right? Not the Eastern Europe where we had the Russian Revolution, the West. Well, in this West, the Great War was a big element to basically trigger a whole existential crisis of capitalism to levels that had not been seen until that moment. In 1919, 1920, the majority of European citizens, especially citizens in Italy and Britain, but not only, were of the idea that their economic system, as they had known it until that moment, was about to crumble. So they were seeing the abolition of the pillars of capitalism, which is private property of the means of production and wage relations, and were experimenting with a whole variety of different ways to organize production and distribution, from workers' councils, cooperatives, guilds, self-management that came also through the nationalization of, for example, coal, which was the main source of energy in Britain and in the world. The Sankey Committee was about to nationalize coal in 1919, which was supposed to be the first measure towards actually the abolition of vertical relations of production in favor of democratic management of the economy. Well, it is in this moment that I described, the capital order describes in the first part of the book, is the variety of alternative societies that were emerging, not just in abstraction, but very concretely. And the case of L'Ordine Nuovo with Antonio Gramsci is very important for my story. And chapter 4 gets into the workers' council movement led by a completely different view of the world of Gramsci. Well, here it is that experts freak out. And experts
before we get to
sure.
the freak out, I just want to just sort of like tease out a little bit more of, I mean, not just the responses, but this is a moment where people see the government of the various countries in the case of your book in Western Europe. When you say breaching what they had done before, can you be more explicit about that? Because they were breaking the rules of nature that they had defined up to that point. And then all of a sudden people were like, hey, wait a second. If we could do this during wartime, why can't we do it during peacetime? Will you be a little bit more explicit as to what those things were? Because we've just gone through the exact same thing. We just eliminated 40% of child poverty overnight. I mean, not overnight, but we just did it. We had the U.S. government sending everybody $1,400 checks, or really $2,000 worth of checks over the course of 2 different checks, and sending parents $300 per kid. And there was a more explicit, I don't know why it had more resonance in 2018, 2019. But there was like, wait a second, we can do that. 5 years ago, you couldn't suggest that that's what the government would do across the board for every, and we just had one of those moments where people are like, wait, we can do that. And will you be explicit as to what some of those things were, how they were breached at that time?
Definitely. So I think actually this is really important, is how chapter 1 of the Capital Order speaks to what just happened during the COVID pandemic, because the very fact that the state stepped in and really breached what was considered possible or natural until that moment. Why? Well, even giving some crumbs to the people, because we're not talking big money, right? The big money went to the usual suspects, the big corporations, and went into basically repurchasing the shares and stuff. But still, the little money people got was sufficient to open boundaries for action through novel imagination of what is possible, right? The fact that people said, hey, if it's my right to receive some money and make a living, during COVID, why shouldn't it just be this the norm? Why couldn't society be based on the fact that everyone, basically on the decommodification of our existence through basic necessities granted as a right to all, right? So this is really important, because it's in these moments that all of the upheaval of the just refusal to go back to work are so threatening to the capital order and thus need protection. So we saw a little bit of what was way bigger during the First World War, which is the why. Well, because I suspect that if, the COVID has been assimilated to a war many times, but the reality was that we weren't really competing against other nations, right? It wasn't really a matter of life or death of a capitalist country. So this meant that, for example, vaccines were never nationalized. What we saw, though, during the First World War is that belligerent countries, in order to defeat one another, had to nationalize production all of the way, okay? There was no option. The ruling elite, the bureaucrats, and the private sector did not want to do it. It wasn't like they were like, hooray, now we go and nationalize everything. They had to do it. They were pressured into doing it because it was clear that the normal functioning of the market mechanism was not quick enough nor efficient enough to achieve the type of war production and war productivity needed in order to construct arms and actually go to the trenches and win against the enemy. So here it is that during the First World War, the state takes over production. And this means not only that it breaches the boundary of private property of the means of production, the fact that this unfettered realm of private property, all of a sudden, you see how that's a political choice. Private property is a political choice. The state has the power to expropriate private producers and take on, at least if not the complete ownership, at least the control of production. And that's what it did in Britain, the cradle of laissez-faire capitalism, the cradle of liberal market imperialism, if we want, was doing something that was considered taboo until that moment. In the meantime, not only was kind of questioning, right, kind of more than questioning, I would say, was unsettling the pillar of private property of the means of production. It was also unsettling the pillar of wage relations as something that was all about impersonal market forces, because the states in war economies took on the main role as employers. And this meant, again, that there was a repoliticization of what until that moment was considered a natural fact, which was, once more, the fact that we were selling our labor power for a price. This price was not a natural given. The state was deciding the price of labor. The state was deciding where to move labor. And this made very explicit that exploitation was a political choice. In a moment during the war in which workers had actually increased their bargaining power. Why? Well, because people were sent to the trenches. So like today, it was a moment in which there was much more demand for labor than supply of labor. So in a moment in which wages could have gone up, what happened was that the state, both in Britain and in Italy, imposed upon the workers the necessity to go to work. And the mobility, they decided where to actually allocate labor. And this created a sense that exploitation was political. Again, it was a political choice. So let's say that the facade of capitalism as being something natural and given was eliminated because the demystification of the state interventionism made it clear to everyone that actually there's nothing obvious about our society. It's all a political choice coming out of collective decision making, and thus it can be subverted by different political choices that can actually aim at abolishing exploitation. And this is why there were so many different types of way in which people were thinking about organizing production for use rather than profit. And this now seems like, oh, she's, a nostalgic socialist. Actually, it was happening in very easy ways. Guild socialism in Britain was thriving. The building guilds were way more successful than their market competitors because people went to work more happily and were actually participating in production, meaning that they were delivering in building houses at lower cost for the British cities. So this is just one example. There's many others of the successes of these alternatives that, though, were making everyone at the top very, very scared, of course.
And I think the evidence you found in these archives, both in Italy and in England, sort of illustrate the fear. And it wasn't so. It's really a two-part situation, right? Like the first part is the veil being lifted on what government can do. In some instances, what government did was not necessarily appreciated, but in other instances, but the point was, it was as if like we're all in this village and we just watched like some people walk through the forbidden zone and they get to where, you know, where the fields are quicker, and they come back and they're like, yeah, no, it just turns out like, just like this part, you could walk right through there. It's just that we had called it the forbidden zone. Don't remember why we did that. And now everybody's like, well, if we can walk through the forbidden zone to get to the crops, maybe we can take the forbidden zone to get to the lake, and we can take the forbidden zone to go down to the village or whatever it is. And then the second part of that is that there were responses once the imagination was broadened as to what workers could do, how government could interact with people. These responses were scary to the capitalist order because they were effective and they were successful. And you went into the archives of the central banks in both, I think, in Italy and in England, and in other places to find primary source material that suggested austerity was a solution to the problem of people experimenting with other ways of organizing the economy that were a threat to wealthy people's money.
Definitely. So this is, for me, very important. And the Capital Order tries to give really a sense of the full spectrum of possibilities. 4 chapters describing the different degrees of radicality of these movements for alternative. So one main point is that what really was threatening the system was the fact that many people were trying to abolish the capitalist state as we know it today as well, right? That the claim for economic democracy, participation in economic decision, and democratic self-governance of production distribution meant potentially substituting the capitalist state that went hand in hand with the capitalist market and was in a way complicit and actually important in maintaining exploitation, in favor of an understanding of a state that was not alienated against the people, was actually the outcome of these councils that were emerging from the bottom up. So this is something very important, because austerity was a reaction not just of the private capitalists, but austerity is a state-led, technocratic, global project to maintain capitalism intact. So fundamentally what we saw is that the reaction came, and the story is told through the archives and through people, right? So I tried to make it less boring for the reader in telling a story of protagonists that went from the radical workers in the first part of the book to the economists who were advising the governments. And so what happened is that they get together at these international financial conferences of Brussels in 1920 and Genoa in 1922. And it's here that for the first time, economists are asked to advise governments and states. So it's very interesting also because the story is also about the economists gaining the authority of the expert, the neutral, supposed neutral, unbiased actor who is supposedly giving us the solution to cure the crisis in the name of the benefit for all. So here what we see is exactly the same rhetoric that goes on today. Invocation of sacrifice, the fact that we're living beyond our means and that everyone has to sacrifice for a better world for everyone. And of course, the underlying analysis here is to really unveil, as you put it, unmask how classist actually the austerity project was, because it was not about everyone suffering for everyone gaining, but actually the majority suffering for the few gaining. And this is exactly what happened, is that in Britain, increases in interest rate and the cuts in social spending produced an economic downturn, exactly what's happening now, by the way, right? Both in the US and in Britain and everywhere else. This production of a recession, self-induction of a recession, was very rational because it tied the hands of organized labor and it defeated all of these alternative practices that had been, in a way, been emerging in the last couple of years. So in 1919, 1920, by the mid-20s, someone like G.D.H. Cole, who was a leader of guild socialism, had no other anything to say but, as he put it, and this is him, and again, this comes from the archive, is him saying, the big working class offensive has been successfully stalled off. And British capitalism, though threatened with economic adversity, felt itself once more safely in the saddle and well able to cope, both industrially and politically, with any attempt that might still be made from the labor side to unseat it. So here it's very clear how rational austerity is. It was successful in producing the conditions that killed the bargaining power of the working classes, because strikes, once unemployment goes up, strikes go down,
Right.
labor mobilization goes down. And here again, we are again in a moment of industrial peace, which is exactly what someone like Jerome Powell today is aspiring towards, is fundamentally the fact that all these strikes stop and people just go back to work, right? So this is what happened in Britain. But in Italy, and this is where I think a very strong message of the capital order comes in. In Italy, the same exact austerity code, which was again devised at these international financial conferences, was put into action in the most efficient way by Benito Mussolini, the first fascist leader, the man who was at the origins of the fascist regime that lasted 20 years. Well, the reason why Mussolini was so successful in strengthening his power, he came to power in 1922, was because of austerity. So austerity was, for him, he was very smart, Mussolini. He realized if he put into practice austerity, not only was he going to defeat the revolutionary movement in his own country, he was also going to gain a lot of consensus from the liberal international elite, Anglo-American elite, who couldn't wait but to have someone like Mussolini reestablish the capital order in Italy.
Okay, and so there's a lot to discuss here, but let's just start though with Brussels and Genoa. Like, how self-conscious was because I mean, the experts that were brought in, they are elevated to, like, we're scientists. We're just telling you that if you, we're as economists as scientists, as opposed to economists as politicians or, sort of like policy prescribers. We're scientists. If you add this, you're going to get this reaction. If you take this away, you're going to get that reaction. This is the way it works. These are laws of nature, et cetera, et cetera. We're not making any choices here. We're simply responding to a natural phenomena. How were were there heterodox economists at that time? A, and B, if there were or weren't, like, how were, because the deal is sealed with who you invite to that conference.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the primary thing. Like, you don't need to do much. If you get the right people to come in and be the experts, then the outcome is more or less, as long as we all agree that we're in a class war. We want this class to win. You guys are the ones who are basically the palace guard of this class. If we invite you into the conference and you're the one to offer the papers and the ideas, we can decide which idea we want, but they're all going to go towards the same goal. How what was the state of the discipline of economics at that time?
Thank you. So very important. This unilateral warfare of austerity was played by actors who were economists of the same mainstream type that we have now, because they were building the neoclassical framework, which is still the one, again, which is dominant today. But it's interesting because at the time, they were not yet orthodox as we understand it now, because the neoclassical framework was just getting diffused in the early 1920s. So interestingly is to see how austerity went hand in hand with the emergence and the spread of mainstream economics as we know it today. And at the time, part of the effort of the Economist was to gain this novel legitimacy and to basically eliminate other frameworks that, of course, were present. So even the classical political economy perspective of someone like Smith, Ricardo, and Marx, that sees the world as made up of, sees capitalism as a unique economic system made up of class conflict, in which the source of value is the worker and surplus comes from unpaid labor. Well, this framework is completely substituted at the end of the 1800s. So, and in the beginning of the 20th century, it's just really emerging with this novel framework, not of classical political economy, but, as you put it before, of pure economics. Neoclassical economics was at the time very intelligently called pure economics, exactly to expel the political element from the very title of the discipline. And instead of classes and conflict, pure economists were seeing a world made of individuals and harmony, and a world in which the word capitalism disappeared. Magically, we shouldn't be talking about capitalism anymore. We should be talking about markets, because capitalism was, in these models, completely naturalized to the point that you weren't even discussing it as a unique socioeconomic system. It was just the only system.
It was just
possible.
normal. It was just the way the world works.
Absolutely.
And that's it. And the way that, and I assume that the way that the concept of pure capitalism, or pure economics, I should say, rises to the top is, I would imagine, at the turn of the 19th century, entering into the 20th century, the way that a academic discipline rises or falls is a function of how much monetary support it gets from wealthy people. Like there's no internet, there's no, I'm not, people aren't going out and just like, oh, this looks like a good economics book, I'm going to buy this one. It really is basically chairs that are established at universities by wealthy people. And of course, they're going to support, consciously or not, forget about intent, they're going to support the ones that have that naturalize a system that justifies their wealth, essentially.
Absolutely. And this is really, really the key, right? So first of all, that the battle was being played at the level of academia. So my protagonists are people like Maffeo Pantaleoni, one of the founders of this, also what is known as the marginalist revolution. And he was in Italy, and he was, colleague of Vilfredo Pareto, Valra, Jevons, all names of the founding fathers of the neoclassical framework. Well, Pantaloni was fighting an academic battle because he had purchased, with the help of the Giornale degli Economisti, so the main journal, and was trying to get rid of the historicist school that in Italy, for example, was dominant until that moment. But here, the whole point is also that this academic battle had enormous political consequences, because it is this new model that justifies exactly what you pointed to, that justifies the fact that the wealthy are entitled to extract resources from the majority and keep it to themselves. How? Well, while classical political economists were pointing their finger to the worker as the engine of the economic machine, all of a sudden it is the saver investor who takes on the leading role in the economy. At that point, you can become saver investor if you're virtuous and if you're a good individual. There's no classes, everyone can make it. Those who make it at the top are because they're actually gaining in favor of everyone else. So, of course, the only rational policy here is austerity, because austerity is all about shifting resources from the majority to the minority. So we see here how austerity necessitates theory to back it as a type of state-led policy, right? So this is why theory and policy go hand in hand, and they reinforce one another. And you need both in order to convince people that there's no other alternative but appropriate the majority. How? Again, privatizing, cutting social welfare, repressing wages, all in favor of increasing the profits of the few. And experts who tell you, look, we have nothing political. We are pure economists. We're using mathematical models that are absolutely beyond class bias. We are the most neutral and trustworthy. You people, you're just too ignorant to understand economics. Leave it to the expert. Now we have all internalized the idea that any economic decision should just be left to the expert because we're too dumb or we're too ignorant. So just leave it to the Fed officials, leave it to the people leading the Treasury. Actually, this again was not something normal, was constructed in a moment in which people were demanding a greater say in decision-making processes, in which central banks were about to get nationalized so that it could actually become a matter of political choice. if you were going to increase the interest rates or not. Well, it is in that moment that experts were all about, no, we need independent central banks. We need to preserve decision making because we are the only neutral, intelligent, knowledgeable parts of society. And of course, this is exactly what the system needs, is a class of experts to justify it.
And I would argue that they don't even wouldn't even call it theory as much as law. Like we're just, we have a theory as to why it rains, but it really is just like, this is just physics, and it rains, and so all right. So coming back, I mean, I think the case that austerity was a defense mechanism for capital, particularly deployed when there was some type of risk to the capitalist order because of something that is, exogenous that is happening, like in the context of COVID, sort of like forces, or war, I guess, forces the government to respond in a different way that we prior to thought was impossible or forbidden for some reason. Why? I know that we have some of that. Like we're seeing like an uptick in labor action. And I think we also, even in the wake of the financial crisis, we have seen a broadening of imagination as to how perhaps our economic system can function. But like, how does I'm reading I'm reading economists who I appreciate, but there is yet to be it seems to me, a full-throated response to what Powell is doing, because that's really where we're seeing the austerity at this point. I mean, and we would have seen, the Inflation Reduction Act, which I have no problem with naming it that, if it passes, was not austerity. It was the opposite. And it should have been much bigger. But in terms of our government response, it seems like the primary driver of austerity at this moment, within the past, I guess, at least in the Biden administration, has been the Fed. Where is the full-throated response? Not that like Jay Powell doesn't seem to get it. Like, where is the full-throated response of like, Jay Powell gets it? It's just that the rest of us don't get it. Like, he's not worried about inflation. He's worried about labor power and a growing discontent with the system. Raising interest rates is not going to bring those 2 million people who retired early back into the fore. It's not going to bring back the, 750,000, maybe more, 800,000 workers who we lost, to COVID. Where is the full-throated response of like, he is showing us that he's playing a different game than everybody presumes he's playing.
So I think you raise a super important point, and it's the reason why I hope the capital order that I just published gives a kind of provides some critical tool to people to see what's actually happening. Because, it's the fact that these experts use such technical jargon, speak about, the labor market being tight, the labor market being robust, supply and demand. It's all a way to depoliticize the issue, right? It's the best way to create a detachment from the daily lives of people who think, well, that doesn't really, regard us. It must be something that just, it's all very technical stuff. Actually, austerity is all about molding people's behavior, disciplining people's behavior. And this, the experts 100 years ago saw very clearly. And this is why the words the capital order takes from the archives, right? The fact that all this archival research is also to show the jargon that was being deployed 100 years ago, which is exactly the same type of jargon we see now. But in that time, it was even more explicit how it was done to defeat specific classes. But today as well, I think it's more than ever obvious. But, economists, even of the most progressive type, are not used to seeing what they do as political because they bought into the narrative that economists are just not political. So, to even just say, hey, listen, this is political and it's affecting specific sections of the society rather than others, is something that it's, even if it's obvious to the experts were so good at imposing austerity for 100 years now that people don't even see it. So they know they're protecting capital, because this is a thing. I think the point here is to say that capitalism, even if they want to have us think that it's always going to remain alive, those in power are very worried of how socially constructed our society is and how potentially fragile it is if the majority rebels. So they are very existentially aware in a way, right? The existential angst is the driver of austerity, and the experts know it. Now, the point is, the austerity has been so successful in the last 100 years that everyone else that is being screwed over by austerity has a hard time realizing that this is all a unilateral class warfare against them.
And we should say that when you say austerity has been successful, it has been successful in squelching any type of attempt to reorganize society, but on its own terms. And I think you cite Mark Blythe, who we've had on the program. Austerity does not do what it purports to do within the context of those who deploy it. But austerity has been quite successful in disciplining labor and those who would reorganize society in a different way.
Yeah, and just increasing the scissor of inequality, right? Which means that while wages stagnate, profits go up. And this is exactly what has happened. And this is, again, the explicit result of these type of policies. And we just need to really, I think, look through them. And that's why the lens of the historian, who is able to provide a different narrative to what happened in the 1920s. Until I wrote this book, there's very little about how important, how key the early 1920s were in order to kind of set the tone for all policies to come in the 20th and 21st century. So it is the lens of the responsibility of a critical historian is to provide some form of historical evidence that can help the reader today to be like, so maybe I should get more involved. So maybe we shouldn't just gobble up whatever they tell us as the necessary economic truth. And this is, for me, really important. And that's why I spent so many years. This is a project that took 8 years to work on. And I would also like to say that it's a book dedicated to Gianfranco Mattei, who was my great uncle, who actually committed suicide in prison when he was caught by the Nazi militia who was occupying Rome. He was a partisan building bombs against the fascist occupancy of Italy. At that point, there were a lot of resistance, civilian resistance. He was caught, tortured, and in order to not to speak, they were actually giving him some poison to have him speak. And he realized that he was about to kind of, give in, and that's when he decided to kill himself in jail. So the point here is that this book for me has a very clear political message, because there's many people out there who are actually fighting for alternatives, but they're usually silenced exactly because they don't have very many channels to express these possible alternatives. And this is why it makes me so happy that there are shows like yours in which you do give voices to different perspectives. And this is part, I think, of the battle and why I wrote this book, really, to get out the message that if we also, history is not a neutral activity, right? The work of the historian is also a political work, even if also historians like to portray themselves as neutral. Any social scientist, any thought is deeply political by the very fact that it is embedded in a certain system. So giving a different narrative for the past helps us construct a different perspective for the future. And this is really why I think I have a message here that I really believe in, and I put so much effort into getting it finally published.
Well, Clara Mattei, we will put a link to The Capital Order, How Economists Invented Austerity and Paved the Way to Fascism. Thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations on the book. Thanks. It's fascinating work, really important, particularly timely right now. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We are back, and we are joined now by Noah Kulwin and Brendan James, hosts of the Blowback podcast, which I always call the excellent Blowback podcast. Many people are saying it's a show about U.S. empire, and this season is about Afghanistan. Noah is also a contributing editor at Jewish Currents, a writer for Defector, and Brendan is a writer, former producer for Chapo Trap House. Guys, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So listen to part of the first episode. I've listened to the 3 previous seasons before. Couldn't recommend it more highly. We actually I wanted to read this before we got started because someone wrote in anticipation, professional dumpster fire. I started listening to Blowback because of the recommendation on the show, and holy cow, it's an amazing podcast. Great to listen to as I moved into my new place. And my dad has been asking about it and how he can listen to it on his phone. So potentially getting boomers on board the maybe U.S. empire isn't the best thing train, which is always helpful. But yeah, let's start with the most devastating part of the first episode. That the title card from Rambo 3 that I've long believed says that the movie was dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters is a misnomer. Is that the case?
Unfortunately, yes, it is. That was the bombshell that we discovered early on, which set the tone for the rest of the season. It is someone just did a really aces job in Photoshop, and it went viral. I don't know how many years ago, but yeah, there's no home video or copy that has ever had that postscript. So, but as a friend of ours said, you don't need that movie to have a postscript that says this film is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen. It makes that very clear throughout the entire film, as did many Hollywood products at the time, which is a kind of an aspect of the season that we go into a bit.
Right. And I mean, I think that's why it rings so true, right? The sentiment is because there are, many people have a general understanding that the U.S. funded the Mujahideen in the past, and they may have even heard the term Operation Cyclone before. So, Noah, I'll ask you an overview. What was that? What happened during that period of history that, the CIA and the United States was pouring money into these groups in Afghanistan, and how did it start?
Sure. So in the 1970s, we began supporting and putting resources behind the people who would become in the future the Mujahideen. And in the late 1970s, within Afghanistan, not anything really that the Soviet Union was doing, a communist party, in response to sort of an ailing despot who had been kind of like a developmentalist leader, they take over. And there's a great amount of intrigue, to put it mildly. But I do think that the sort of central point is that the U.S. was involved and we had an interest there before. But once the Afghan Communist Party took over, it was very unstable. And the Soviets, I'll let Brendan explain the nuances of what comes next there, because I think it perhaps matters a little bit more. But, well before we even get into sort of ramping up the aid. But we had sort of viewed Afghanistan in the 1970s as a potential Cold War battleground, after it had been kind of in the background for the decades past. It hadn't mattered that much. But then Communist Party takes over, and all sorts of opportunities present themselves in the chaotic year of 1979.
Yeah, I would say that we tend to make it a point of our show that the funding and the relationship between some pretty bad customers inside of Afghanistan had begun before the Communist Party there got to power and before the Soviet invasion, many years before. But it started to grow and grow as it became clear that it was more useful by the day. And so Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor to Carter, was really the most sort of active organizer of a jihad against the Soviet Union. And by the time Reagan was in power, all the things were in place to just have this thing become what it became, which is the largest covert operation in CIA history. And some of our clients there were some of the highest paid CIA assets in history. And they were the types of guys who, long before Al-Qaeda was on anyone's lips, were known for throwing acid in the face of women, and known for killing school teachers, be they communist or otherwise, known for essentially what we now think of and what that Rambo 3 spiritual truth is about, which is that they were the Contras of Central Asia, really. And so the first half of our season is really watching that supply chain grow. It's watching these guys get recruited. It's seeing who was pulling the strings in this project. And of course, looking at the Soviets who, while it was true that they barreled into Afghanistan knowing it was a mistake. They did try to go to the UN for peace negotiations from the get-go, which was quite unlike the U.S. and Vietnam, a conflict this is always compared to. And so we also try to look at, there may be some lessons about what happens when a superpower is bleeding another one, and what happens when they try to stop peace negotiations from their desperate enemy, or just stop them altogether until their friends don't sue for peace, keep this going, because that's very much what was happening at this time as well. So that's the first half of the season before we even get to the U.S. occupation and invasion.
Well, you mentioned Vietnam there, and I mean, either of you can take this, but how did the U.S. failure in Vietnam play a role domestically, politically, in the United States is just pouring money, which a lot of that obviously was behind the scenes, but into these extremist religious kind of rural groups in Afghanistan to combat the growing communist kind of parties and discussions and organizations happening largely, is my understanding, in the more urban areas of Afghanistan.
Yeah, so the Vietnam comparison is one that the American government and the people who carried out this operation made themselves, and sort of they viewed this as the kind of natural response. Like, we had suffered a Vietnam, like, this country that we bombed into oblivion halfway across the world. We were the victims there, of course. But and then after that war, there was, for a lot of the people who had suffered it, there was the desire to inflict something similar in the Soviet Union. And that's not to say that that's the reason all this happened or anything like that. Just that it's what, when you look at what these people are saying about why they're doing what they're doing, it's something that weighs very heavily on them. And, something that has only sort of occurred to me in like recent weeks is, that John Milius, who wrote Red Dawn, which is spiritually about Afghanistan. Like, it's about what if we made the Americans the Mujahideen. And Milius is also the guy who wrote Apocalypse Now with, with Coppola. And I think that that sort of is a nice, representation of how these kinds of ideas are linked about, we suffered this grievous, had this disarming, disorienting experience for the American. And now we're going to go do with that to the Soviet Union. Consequences be damned for the country of Afghanistan, which will become, as a result of this, a perpetual battleground for, 40 to 50 years.
And just one thing I think is important to note is how the two conflicts are very much not the same thing. I mean, obviously, in a basic sense, you have a superpower bogged down in a military quagmire. That, I can understand why people would call that a Vietnam for the Soviet Union. But on the other hand, as I've sort of started to try and articulate when we explain the show or the season, is the Soviets and the Chinese did not invent Ho Chi Minh or the resistance to U.S. occupation in Vietnam. They were quite on their way without all that. Now, the Soviets and the Chinese did give billions, probably not as much as the U.S. ended up giving in Afghanistan, but they did support those resistance fighters. But in the case of Afghanistan, the U.S. cobbled together the worst criminals who happened to be the most brutal commanders, and tried to organize them into a coherent resistance front. And it didn't really work because they were always trying to kill each other. They were always fighting over turf. They were fighting over drugs, which was a huge source of funding for them.
Yes.
And we can get to that. But and then, of course, the real proof in the pudding is after the Soviets exit, which they do in quite an orderly way in comparison. That's one big comparison to the U.S. Project later on. They leave a government in place, but it's beset by these disparate warlords. And those are some of the bloodiest years of Afghanistan, is when these guys, knowing that they were never really friends or never a coherent national resistance movement, they just start killing each other. They start blowing up Kabul, which is one of the few places, the capital of the country, one of the few places that was untouched by the war, and a very important place, obviously, in Afghanistan as the capital. And then out of them grows the Taliban and Al Qaeda and all this other stuff. That
with
did not
U.S.
happen in
money.
Vietnam.
I mean, just to hammer that point home, like, this was. You can finish your sentence. Sorry, Brendan.
No, absolutely. With U.S. money, with Toyota pickup trucks, we bought them with all the trimmings, and we really didn't care and oppose the Taliban when they showed up either. We were playing footsie with them about pipeline deals, natural gas that could go through Afghanistan, which was always the hope after the Soviet Union fell. So anyway, it was a very different conflict in many important ways. than Vietnam. But as you both pointed out, it was a great thing for Americans culturally, politically, to be able to say, now it's their turn to be the imperialist, and we can just spin all of this in reverse and project all of this Vietnam syndrome, so-called, that we've been having only a couple years before the Soviet invasion, and then just place it on Russia, and not, examine any of the ways that not only are we not over Vietnam, we're now funding this war that we're claiming is the worst threat to peace since World War II.
They're just as bad, and they're also incompetent in their battles, and I mean, that just is the fact that was a consideration, even if it's somewhat subconscious, is damning in and of itself. But you mentioned the pipeline element. Again, either of you could take this, but outside of maybe it being, one, a proxy battle, obviously, between the United States and the USSR, and two, a potential ground for a pipeline to pass through, what was the strategic importance of Afghanistan, or was there any resource extraction? Because I think it's a little different than, say, when we're having a conversation about Iraq, where that was quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
A good point of compare. So this is the part where drugs sort of figure in, because to your point, part of what, natural resources may not be part of what initiates a war, but they can absolutely play a role in sustaining it because they provide revenues to the belligerents. And the role, like the natural resource in Afghanistan, because as you point out in your question, or as you're sort of alluding to in your question, Emma, there weren't really, many developed industries in the country. There was not the existing agricultural infrastructure in the country had been demolished by the war over the course of the war. So it meant that the only really remaining kind of resource that was left to exploit, and exploit it they did, was opium, which people can read about how poppies are easy to grow and very durable. And Afghanistan is right next to Pakistan. And another way to understand this conflict is, then to think about, well, then hold on. If the only thing that they have is the drug money and stuff, and that arose as a consequence primarily of the wars, which is true, then, what is the value there? And that's hard for Americans to see naturally because we don't live there. But for the countries that are all there, for instance, Russia and the Soviet Union, which are next door, what happens in Afghanistan is important in the way that, what happens in Mexico or Canada is important to Americans. And for the case of Pakistan, especially, I think their influence and their role here explains a lot as well. Because, for example, the opium industry and the, some of the basis for the rise of the Taliban, for instance, were, Pakistani shipping mafia or magnates, if you like. And there's a, real, I think, kind of, those are the sorts of commercial relationships that are the really influential ones, for example, are, I think, in determining the kinds of politics that you're talking about.
But it has to be more submerged. So, I mean, the fact that the heroin industry was a driving factor here, I guess my question is how can that be subtextual when it seems so clear? And then also it's a black market drug, obviously. So what is the direct benefit for capitalists in the United States?
Well, the really amazing thing that tends to happen to make everything look a little too simple sometimes is that right as we sort of walked away from Southeast Asia as the center of the Cold War, in which the CIA, this is a well-known phenomenon, a lot of great books on it. They created the Golden Triangle, the heroin trade in Southeast Asia, as a means of funding for all kinds of things, not least the Cold War shenanigans that were always going on. And we simply took that model and brought it into Afghanistan, which of course had the poppies to serve as another drug outpost that would provide illicit funds. And what capitalists got out of it, in a sense, was, there's always this political or geopolitical thing going on, and then there's a direct graft or economic carrot and stick that wars of course represent. And it was just one of those more kind of sleazy underbelly aspects. I obviously no big American company was looking for the next heroin contract in the same way that Exxon was looking for the next, contract coming out of Baghdad. But loads of Western officials were paid off throughout the years with heroin money. And I would put it like this as well, that, in Afghanistan, we see the intersection of both the war on terror, of course, but also the war on drugs. And neither war, so-called, is really about abolishing terror, per se, or abolishing drugs, per se, be it over there or over here. It's about market share. It's about getting rid of people who are not in our club who deal drugs and making space for the people who are in the club who deal drugs. And plenty of our clients, the warlords who came out of the Mujahideen, some of them ended up in the Taliban, some of them ended up on our side in the Karzai government. They were protected. They were kingpins all over the government in Afghanistan that we thought were good guys and deserved their share of the heroin trade, and who were also terrorists and deserved their share of the terrorism racket as well. So you're right. It is a much more. It's not nearly as sort of surface level evil as the war for oil or whatever that happened in Iraq. But Afghanistan was always kind of a means to an end for the British and for the Americans. For the Soviets, it was a government over their border that they thought was cracking up and, quite erroneously thought they could prop up. But, the British and the Americans always used it as a means to control the spigot of that region. And as we saw, they didn't stop at Afghanistan in the Bush administration. They went right on to the next war. And I think their plan after that was the real prize, which would be Iran, which of course shares a border with Afghanistan. And with a pliant Afghanistan and a pliant Iraq, there would be the ability to do what the neocons always really dreamed of, but things went so poorly that they didn't get to do it, which was really control Iran eventually.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes it so much more clear. And I guess this is a good time to kind of go a little bit, zoom out a little bit and just explain what the Mujahideen was for the audience and what that meant domestically in Afghanistan, what the people of Afghanistan were experiencing during this period, and how obviously that, unimaginable trauma, generational trauma and suffering continues to this day.
Sure. So one way of thinking about it is that the Mujahideen, which is just Arabic for warriors, they were essentially like mafia chieftains. And that meant that they were competing for the equivalent of state authority with the state, which is, a pretty, it basically meant that, in the places mostly in the countryside, in the smaller cities that were especially not in Kabul, you had essentially the existing government fighting for basic authority, control over territory with these warlords who were getting pumped full of cash. And the consequence was, just these constant fights over territory that would level, where people lived. Civilians suffered from bombings, both from the air and from the Soviet side, and then also you had bicycle bombs from the Mujahideen side that they had been given by the CIA. They'd been trained to make by the CIA. There's what the Afghan experienced throughout this period as a basis for the Mujahideen that were fighting to liberate the country was just the outright destruction of the country. And it's a thing that really intensifies because once the Soviet Union is defeated, the Mujahideen transform from, they cease being called the Mujahideen and they become, people now generally refer to them as warlords. And it's, like all that happens is that, well, there's no more state to speak of. So now they are all competing to effectively have that title. And that's, you can sort of track the degree of violence along those lines as the conflict develops over the years.
To get specific and offer a couple individuals who were, well-known commanders and our favorite commanders. And we should also say it wasn't just America funding these guys and training these guys. It was really a State Department. I don't know if it was a CIA or State Department cable or memo. It calls it an axis, which is you may not be on the right side of something if you're calling your own team the Axis. But it was America, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, the Chinese communists actually at the time, because at that point they had made nice with the U.S. and were now considered the Soviets the bigger enemy, and other participants, Israel, South Africa, sometimes. So they were all funding and sort of matching each other's funds for the Mujahideen, but America was by far, it was the superpower. So we were the one that exercised perhaps the most influence along with Pakistan. At any rate, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar is one of our favorite commanders. It was sort of the vision anyone has of a Taliban or an Al-Qaeda, sort of severe features and, brutal attitude toward women and any kind of progressive society that's possible in Afghanistan. He was one of the earliest contacts that we made way back in the 70s. And he was an open criminal and warlord at the time. More sort of a smooth criminal was this guy named Ahmed Shah Massoud, who was sort of built up in the West as the kind of religious Democrat or sort of like progressive fighter, who, if you read the actual CIA guys' accounts, his guys ran as many drugs and executed their strategy with as much sexual violence against their opponents as any other commander in the Mujahideen. Really, really blood-curdling stuff. But you kind of it was like a good cop, bad cop thing. You kind of had to have one guy who looked like, well, he's one of the good ones. He's one of the moderates. I mean, we saw this with Syria, the moderate rebels and all this stuff. It's a good way to kind of like, provide a sheen that gives some illusion to, this being a possible progressive policy in some way. And there were other guys who were kind of just, hucksters who were, I kind of like respect how they just took what they could from the U.S. trough and said, look, they're sending us, free guns and money. Let's just say we're holy warriors, when in fact they were, as Noah said, mafia dons. And so there's a lot of colorful characters, but guys you would not want controlling the eastern part of your country or the western part of your country or whatever, once there's no law and no state anymore. And that's precisely what happened after the Soviets left.
And I feel like everyone should subscribe to Blowback, so and people are more familiar with the recent history, right? So we don't. I'm so much more interested in just like setting this table for people, because obviously it's super key to know that our involvement in Afghanistan did not just start after 9/11. This is all of the context that leads to this particular point. And before I let you guys go, if you could just re-emphasize the scale of money, of weapons that we poured into Afghanistan that leads directly to, like, we shouldn't have left Afghanistan to save the women, to teach them how to read, is what they said to us when Biden withdrew, which was a very good thing that Biden did. To just shine a light on how disingenuous that is, because of all of that history, the amount of money, the amount that we poured into this project, which was an abject failure and destructive force.
Yeah, I would say that the hypocrisy, of course, about the women's rights. I mean, we're already letting money slide to the Taliban again. We've frozen bank assets, of course, but that goes back as a canard, because when the communist government, for whatever their other flaws in their political practice, they were trying like hell to build schools and to educate women. And we, more than any other force, made sure that would never become a nationwide reality in Afghanistan. And we have a great interview that we sprinkle throughout the season, and then have the full thing in the bonus episodes if people subscribe, with an Afghan politician named Malalai Joya, who was the first and youngest woman MP, member of parliament in Afghanistan, who has more right to speak on this kind of thing than anyone else. And she was a lifelong advocate against the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. But the scale of Operation Cyclone, forget what comes later. I mean, it was upwards of 10 to 12 billion, which at the time was, again, not only the largest CIA operation in history, but a lot of money. And
also probably the tip of the iceberg. The nature of covert operations, it should be stressed, is that like you don't ever really know fully about what's below the surface, especially ones that were as tightly held as this was for as many years.
Billions upon billions of dollars that went to everything, not just guns, but school books for children that taught kids how to basically read and write and count in jihadist terminology that we printed in the out of the University of Nebraska, which when the Taliban took over, they happily used. It wasn't just guns and trucks and stuff. It was everything, like every part of their country we tried to shape toward a jihad. And of course that, today there are many such cases, but it was billions of dollars. And it as one U.S. official put it after 9/11, this is going to change your country forever. Forget us. You could say that about any point of our involvement in Afghanistan's history. We were always affecting the next chapter of their history against their will in every way possible.
Yeah. Any final thoughts here, Noah, before we let you go?
Just that. Well, first, thanks again for having us on, and that if you want to listen to the whole season all at once right now, so season 4 is available fully right now for $25. You can sign up at blowback.show. Just click the button that said subscribe. It'll bring you there. You can listen on all your favorite podcast apps. The archive, you get all of our episodes from the past for free, and you'll be getting updates and promo codes for upcoming merch, which we are doing for the first time.
Oh, cool.
So did I miss anything, Brendan? Oh yeah, and the score, because Brendan does all of the music and the sound.
No way.
Yeah. So the third, and we're I guess this will be your third soundtrack release, which comes out on September 25th. And unbelievably, and I wanted to say this and not Brendan, the guy who designed Brendan's album art is also the guy who designed, it has now been revealed, the next Doja Cat album art.
Whoa.
So Brendan James, Doja Cat have the same album art.
And we will both be up for awards at the VMAs this
Absolutely.
year as well.
I mean, I look forward to that.
I'm excited to see Brendan eat on the red carpet.
Well, I mean, you're already kind of a celebrity, Noah, because you were photographed at that Knicks game. Who were you behind?
Edie Falco.
Edie Falco. Look at that. I mean, and you're in Jersey, so like that is a full circle photo op. Got to say.
I said, hey, I'm from Montclair, and she was like, oh, I've heard of it.
No, I did not know you were from Montclair. You know that I'm from Glen Ridge. Did I tell you that?
Oh, well, there you go.
There you go. Wow.
And I'm also a Bergen County boy.
Bergen County boy over here. We're in the Jets.
Basically
jersey.
in New Jersey. The majority that they're referring to in the majority report is that the majority of you are from New Jersey.
Correct.
Yes. Sorry, Brendan. I'm not sure.
I feel very othered suddenly.
Yes. I apologize. I'll make it up to you by we'll be putting a link to the sign up for Blowback in the description or wherever you're listening to this. Or watching this, and at majority.fm. Hopefully that smooths some things over with us.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, guys, really appreciate your time today. Lots of positive comments here about Blowback, loving the season. So everyone check it out. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland. It is the Majority Report. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today star of not just the TV and comedy clubs, but now Broadway, off Broadway. It should be Broadway, but it's probably off Broadway.
Thank you. It is off Broadway.
And also the subject of this song.
Level-headed.
Fuck you!
Calm, cool, and collected.
I have a bigger penis than him.
Judy Gold is on the line to keep us all connected.
What the fuck is the matter with him?
A steady hand to guide us. She'll keep us calm and carry on.
No fucking way!
Too bad Jimmy Reefer Cook didn't find her worthy of a song. Judy Gold.
And he's such a fucking penis head liar. I'm not kidding.
Oh yeah, we should say folks.
Not safe for work.
The president of the United States. That's
There's a little
the
cussing.
president.
Gonna be a
Like
bad.
this guy, fucking. How did this happen?
Okay. Judy Gold, you look great. You look like in show form right now.
Oh God, Samuel, you look very handsome with your beard, and Emma always quite attractive. Matt,
Wow. Well, thank you, Judy. Your curls are luscious today.
Oh, thank you.
Can we put this up? We are just less than a month away. You're at rehearsals for this.
I had not seen this before. This is amazing.
Wait, how great is that?
So
By the way, suspended from Facebook. We were locked out of Facebook because there's a ball gag. But you can fucking lie. You can, spread conspiracy theories. You can disparage people. I mean, what? First of all, that song, which I am so proud of. You'd think it was about someone else, but it was created for Orange Fuckface. But now it applies to so many fucking people.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying like the anger that you were there. Like I know I mentioned to you that we had some clips of George Santos.
There are no words for how much I hate that lying son of a fucking bitch, piece of shit, no dignity. no integrity, and get out of the LGBT community. We don't want you. Go fuck yourself, okay? I hate that scumbag so much. How is he still there? How is he still there?
There is a provision. Well, let's play some of these clips, and then we can talk about how to get them. First off, there's basically been a three-part series, I guess, of this that has taken place involving. There's also it's almost like a love triangle. It's Santos and Mitt Romney and Kristen Sinema. And it's a weird love triangle that exists here between the three of them, and it's a weird dance. It's almost something you would see in nature, like a bird show where like they're in the air and they're. The first is a clip of. We played a clip of Mitt Romney the other day where he talked about his that Santos was a sick puppy. He said, and he had some type of like uncomfortable exchange with him. Well, the guys from Bad Lip Reading, I guess apparently they are pretty good lip readers. And they lip read this and added the thing. And it's really interesting. And it seems to be accurate. But this is, to be clear, this is the Bad Lip Reading guys' voices, but doing what they believe is actually a legit lip reading. This is their exchange.
You ought to be embarrassed. Yeah, sure. You ought to be embarrassed. You ought to be embarrassed. How are you? You ought to be embarrassed, son. Sure, you got me? Well, that's your opinion. You're an ass. Yeah, you're very formal. Quite a gentleman, aren't you?
Well, that didn't go so well for those two. It was a little bit of a tussle there.
I mean, that's the Mormon way of, you're an ass.
I can't believe he said ass. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, he might have to repent. I don't really know how it works there.
I mean, that is not no.
Well, you're not the only one to think that was not appropriate for a Mormon. They caught up with George Santos the next day, and this is what he had to say.
It's not the first time in history that I've been told to shut up and go to the back of the room, especially by people who come from a privileged background. And it's not going to be the last, and I'm never going to shut up and go to the back of the room. And I think it's reprehensible that the senator would say such a thing to me in the demeaning way he said. It wasn't very Mormon of him.
Ooh. Oh my God! Oh, because you're a Jew? You can say that? you fucking like the fact he's so. I don't understand. Like, I mean, I love that one female reporter who's always there, like in his fucking face with a microphone. But I have to say, how did he wake up in the morning and say it wasn't me? You're a fucking liar. You said your family survived the Holocaust. You fucking killed puppies. You wrote bad checks. You're a fraud, you fucking piece of shit. And you're judging other people. Oh, it wasn't very nice. You're not very nice, you fucking asshole.
No, he was relishing that one opportunity he's had to be on his high horse for like the first time since the saga started.
What about how he got there early to get a good seat? What is he, fucking 90 years old, going to like a fucking matinee?
I think that you cannot the only explanation for a guy like this is that there is some type of like real mental issues that's driving this. And these stories that we hear about men or women who are doing these sort of like they're just driven by this sort of like weird compulsion.
I mean, look at his face right here. Can we put this still up? Yeah. He's just like, he looks like the most evil, conniving dude you've ever seen.
He's so disgusting.
That glimmer in his eye.
All right. Okay.
Here he is. But I mean, for him, this is a perfect opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. Because he has been trying to associate with the sort of like Matt Gaetz part of the party.
Right.
Because that is the last refuge, right? Like you go in there and it's like, we forgive all sins as long as you march in lockstep with us and get on the sort of like, this the MAGA train. And Mitt Romney has given him a great target because it is a way for him to maintain some type of victimization and also to choose the best enemy in the Republican Party.
Yes.
And now he's thrown a bomb into what was a budding relationship, it seemed like, in the Senate. One's going to wonder what's going on with this. He was on Newsmax.
Mitt Romney, yesterday. Mitt Romney was mobbed because he had a conversation with you. I think we have footage. There were about 15 reporters following him around because he talked to you. maybe you heard, I was annoyed with Mitt Romney. I think he could have offered you some generosity, maybe some advice. There are a million places to meet on Capitol Hill. He claimed not to hear what you said. You said something back to him. He claimed not to hear it. Number one, is he telling the truth? And number two, what did you say?
Well, I'll put it this way. It's not meant for television what I said back to him. But I can tell you one thing. He did hear me. And Kyrsten Sinema, as she was walking by, the senator from Arizona, she said something to the effects of hang in there, buddy, or something like that. I said, thank you, Madam Senator. She was very polite, very kind-hearted, as I've learned to see her. She's a good person, unlike Mr. Romney, who thinks he's above it all and is in a whole almighty white horse trying to talk to us down on morality. The reality is he's always has prejudice towards minority. He had it in his 2012 election, and that is why he didn't become president when he absolutely had the opportunity to become president. And that's why I was very clear when I said on Twitter, you will never be president because you would never represent all Americans.
I didn't hear that about.
Now,
what?
Now, what's amazing is you could see Kyrsten Sinema was that woman who walked by and said, and he said, thank you very much to her. So
birds of a feather, baby.
But she's coming in with Romney together, and Romney attacked her right after she had said that. And look at the guy's face. Can we go back to that moment where he starts talking about minorities?
Oh, he's like grinning.
No, Greg Kelly is just sort of like, whoa, you're not supposed to talk about defending minorities. We don't have you on here because you're a minority. We have you on here because you're MAGA.
And you're a liar, which we love. Yeah.
Wow.
I know, he's like twitching. He's twitching. Look at that. He doesn't even know what the fuck to do. Someone mentioned like a minority. The fact that he's like, well, he's getting mobbed because he was talking to you. That's exactly what that motherfucking liar wants. He loves that. Yes, yep. I'm very important. Meanwhile, his constituents came there the other day, like with protesting in front of his office. Like he has no, what the fuck?
Over like 70% of his constituents, and it's a purple district in Long Island. It can go either way. They want him out. I mean, it's like 72, 75. Yeah.
Where is like one of the, I mean, Mitt Romney said you don't belong here, but where's the one person going, come on, people, let's go. This is not good for our brand, whatever our fucking, they don't even, it's so, he needs to be recalled like a fucking romaine lettuce. I hate that motherfucker.
There's no actually recall, but there is, and the last time it happened was, I think it was a guy named Trafficant, if I remember correctly. I feel like he was from Illinois. And he had been convicted of I can't remember what, maybe it was fraud or something like this. And he got expelled by almost, I think it was like a unanimous vote against Trafficant. So you can get expelled from the, you need, I think it's 2/3. Will you just check on that? I think it's 2/3.
Yeah, Matt, do something.
If it's 2/3, then you got to figure all the Democrats would vote, and you'd need about, I don't know, 80 Republicans. I can't do the math. But 80 Republicans to vote against it. And it's just not going to happen because they don't have enough Republicans in their majority to risk it. And
Democratic governor in New York too, right? So if he stepped down, it would be a temporary.
I don't know. We should look into that. But it's so unlikely to happen that.
Remember the first day when he had no friends, where he was sitting there like, you know, the new kid at school, but everyone already fucking hates your guts. The fact that he has, people are fucking hanging out with him.
I mean, they can't, like, I bet you there's
somebody's telling me Trafficant was from Ohio, and he was Youngstown, Ohio.
Convicted on 10 felony counts, including taking bribes, filing false tax returns, racketeering, and forcing his congressional staff to perform chores at his farm.
I mean, Santos is on his way with like half of those.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is, like, how many Republicans are like actually not that different from DeSantis, but just like have keeping
they don't get caught under wraps? Right. Can you imagine if a comedian like killed some puppies, put up some fake charity, and took the money and killed puppies? Done. They're done.
Yeah.
And all the just other lies that come out daily. Like, I'm surprised with that Romney thing that when he was like, he's not a true Mormon, and I would know because I am very high up in the ladder.
Yeah, and you're a true. What's true about you? What is true about young. He is everything I fucking hate. Everything rolled up into a fake gay guy.
So, Judy, that's a great segue into your show.
He's probably not even gay.
Well, I mean, you gotta question just about everything with that guy.
Right.
I mean, it would be, honestly, at this point, like, it's impossible to know what, like, any of it, to what extent any of it is true. But is this something that you're going to be talking about on your show? Tell us about your show. Are you in the theater right now?
Well, no, I'm in the rehearsal space. You know, I'm in the theater, Sam. I do theater. I'm an actor.
Yeah.
So my book, yes, I can say that, which is about free speech from the perspective of a comedian. I wrote that with my friend Eddie Sarfati. And then, Primary Stages, which is a really great theater company. They had worked with me on something else and said, would you like to do a show? And what would you do? And I said, I'd love to bring this to life because it's so important to me that you cannot silence comedians. And so I asked my friend B.D. Wong if he would direct, and he said yes. And
he's a pretty well-known actor.
Law and Order SVU.
Oh yeah, and
he
so
was a
much
big
more.
Stage. He was a big stage. He won like a.
He won a Tony for M. Butterfly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, Emma, but you're too young.
I'm so sorry.
It's true.
Yeah. And he said yes, and I always pick directors for my shows who are going to see something I'm not going to see, who are not, annoying, loud Jewish people, know?
Right.
And so I know him for 30 years because we did All American Girl, the Margaret Cho series.
Oh, that's right.
Together, and we've been friends.
I forgot about
yes.
that.
We've been friends.
I did the final episode of that.
Yes, I know. The one where we all got fired and then you came in to be the friend.
Yeah, well, the grandma was still there. I was her roommate.
Right.
The grandma
Yeah,
stayed.
the grandma's the only one who stayed.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I forgot that you and B.D. were on that.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Oh, gosh. Yeah. All right.
And so he and I have been friends for all that time, and he's so inappropriate like comedians are, but no one knows that about him. He totally gets me.
Well, they do now.
Yeah, but he totally gets me. Like, he really knows me. And I was so happy that he said yes. And the process is amazing. It's just like bringing a book to life is so hard.
I was going to say, how do you do that?
Well, it started, we have 872 drafts of it. And it's a lot of cutting because I don't want it to be a TED Talk. You want to make it active and you want to make people, go on a journey with you and leave there different than when they came. And I think we finally did it, but it's taken
Do you have somebody who's like in a book costume who comes out to provide like some type of action quality? They come out like this.
Are you looking for a job?
And they come out and like the pages turn and you. All right.
No, Sam.
All right. I'm
not doing a TED Talk.
It's
okay?
one idea I had.
It's not funny.
So what do you do?
Funny, and that's why you.
Okay, you want it to be funny. All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's one way.
I want it to be funny.
Okay.
I want it to be provocative, and I want to get my fucking point across that you have to stop. Once you start silencing comedians and silencing satire and truth tellers, that's the end of civilization as we know it. It is destructive to our survival.
Now, okay. Now let me just question you here on this.
Okay.
And maybe this is, we're going to come see the show and then maybe we'll have like a more complete conversation.
Post-mortem. Yeah.
But what do you mean by silence? Like who's been silent?
Okay. It happens
for the jokes.
I'm going to give you some examples.
The jokes they tell.
Okay. There are a lot of comedians who are jailed in other countries, who are murdered by the Taliban, who are, their lives are over because of jokes they have said. Your friend, Donald fucking asshole piece of shit, orange fuckface Trump, tried to get the DOJ to investigate Saturday Night Live. Okay? They are banning books. They are.
No, I know all that.
Yes.
We also know Nixon got the Smother Brothers canceled on CBS.
Right. And yet they were canceled. But then Johnson or what's his name wrote him a letter after they were canceled, saying.
Enjoyed your show.
How about Kathy Griffin?
But wait a second. Yeah.
Kathy Griffin. Exactly.
I guess.
Still
Okay.
can't answer her phone. The point is, we tell the truth. We tell the truth. Most comedians.
Some comedians.
George Santos as a comedian would not. He would be the worst fucking comedian.
There are some comedians who tell the truth. There's some who don't. I mean, come on. I mean, I've seen a lot of comedians.
Okay, why are you acting like you're so like? Okay, come on. All right, let's be real, Judy. I'm a white entitled male, and I do stand up, and I know.
No, I don't do stand up.
Yeah,
I don't.
I know
do
you used to do stand up.
Not even. Barely even. But,
all right, thank you for finally admitting that, because we've all been waiting here.
I've said that many times. But wait. But like who? But who is like, and certainly like, Kathy was, attacked for her, her thing hanging on the, the Trump.
Here's the thing, Sam. We are heading in that direction. And when I talk to young comedians, very, like young, who are just starting out, you know what it was like. We went to clubs. We were like, said whatever the fuck we wanted.
Well, part of the problem is that
social media
and phone cameras. Like, I mean, I gotta say, I am happy there were no phone cameras when I was in the clubs and the bits that we did, because not even from a necessarily like a political correctness or a woke perspective, but just sort of like, there were things that we did that I would be a little bit embarrassed. Okay. This is across society now in terms of like junior high school and this and that. You don't have to be a comedian to have that.
Can you just shut the fuck up for a minute?
Yeah, I'll try for a second. You got a whole one woman show. That's all I got.
Here's the thing. I talked to young comedians, and they told me that if they want to work in certain clubs, mostly in Brooklyn, they can't. There are certain topics they're not allowed to mention to get stage. If they need to get stage time, they will not get booked if they mention certain topics.
Which ones?
Israel. If one of them even says, I'm Israeli, or I went to Israel. Like, you can't even say I went to Israel.
That was not in the way that I thought it was going to go.
You can't say, Eddie, what else was abortion?
One of the comics had a joke about her interracial relationship.
Oh, yeah. One comic had a whole joke about her interracial relationship. No, she wasn't allowed to do that. Nimesh Patel got his mic cut off at Columbia. Ahmed did a joke in Florida about being Middle Eastern, and someone called 911, and 2 cops came to the show the night because they felt threatened.
But I mean, to be fair, he was Middle Eastern.
Sam,
I'm joking.
I'm joking. This is why you were not a successful.
I'm joking. Come on, that was funny. That was funny.
All right.
That was funny.
But I mean, I'm telling you, there are certain clubs that have safe space. You're not allowed to do jokes about this, that. They are being censored.
But it is really, isn't it though? It's just a question of like different club owners have audiences that I remember doing like the the Kowloon on Route 1, and I did a joke about I think it was about Bertrand Russell or something like that, and the guy in the front row was like, he's a fag, and he said that about me to his buddy, and I never got booked there again because they're like, oh, your stuff is like you're talking about books, dude.
Okay, but that's fine. That's just saying you're not right for our audience, right?
Right.
They're not saying you cannot bring up that topic at our club. These are the things you're
we're not going to book you because we're not even going to give you the opportunity to avoid that.
That's a business decision. That's a business decision. You don't work. You're not great for our room. And it was before, Sam, you had your own audience. Like now, if you went out and did the Kowloon, it would be filled with Majority Report listeners, and it would be a whole different thing. So no, that is not equal. You know how many times I got fucking heckled and because I'm a big les, I was out in the mid 90s talking about being a big les in the mainstream clubs. But it's like before the person even gets on stage, they're telling them,
don't say this, don't say that.
Yes. And they can't get better. You can't get better. And we need the audience. It's the only art form where in real time, the audience sees a work in progress and it affects the outcome of that.
Why do you think these club owners do that? Or the bookers?
I don't think all the bookers do it.
Well, to the extent that some do, like
I think they're Gen Z. A lot of them, because now, remember you used to go to an open, you'd be like, you go sign up and just wait around and do a set. Now they're produced. Those shows are produced by people. So, we used to be able to just get stage time. Now you have to bring people and all this other shit. But
right.
I think this political correct nonsense has, instead of what it's meant for, which is, protecting or just saying something in the right way or in a more thoughtful way, is now just, you can't say it at all. The intent's gone. It's like, you say a joke.
It shouldn't be. I mean, I agree in the sense that like, there shouldn't be topics that are off limits. You should have the opportunity. Like, I got fired for a joke that mentioned the word rape in it. And ostensibly that was, it was in response to Roman Polanski.
Yes, I remember.
To rehabilitate him. And I made a joke about if my daughter was ever to get raped, I would like it to be a much older man who has a great sense of mise en scène. And the idea being that, like I was showing, like you can't excuse rape by a guy just because he's a good director.
Okay. You are just, what was that? You just proved my point. You just proved my point.
Well, I got rehired, and I will say I got rehired, and it was people could look and assess the joke and say like, this is pretty clearly. In fact, I had anti-rape activists who were saying like, this is the 1% or 2% of rape jokes that are okay because you're attacking people who are being apologists for rapists. And so your point is like,
but not
topics
everyone
shouldn't be off. You need the opportunity to have people develop those jokes.
Right.
I think that's true.
Thank you. And great comedy can cause great discourse, like my act. People leave there and have the most intense discussions.
Do you anticipate, do you think that the people are going to be coming to your show to complain? Like, are people going to go like, oh my God, I was so offended by that? How many people do you think over under on that? How could anybody come to your show and be like, I had no idea?
Right.
I thought this was going to be about ball gags.
Yeah, well, I do a whole ball gag thing. I act it out because I want it to be active.
Right, no, of course.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what people are going to expect. It's a play. It's a story about what could happen to us and how much comedy means to me, and the direction we're going in. But yes, there are inappropriate things there, but they're,
What theater?
Please, if they get offended, go fuck themselves.
What theater is this at, Judy?
At 59 E59. And if you want to know where that is, that's on 59 East 59th Street. It's a great theater. There's a bunch of theaters in there, and it's great.
When does it start?
So previews begin March 4th. The show opens March 21st. That's opening night. And it runs till April 16th. And you can get tickets now.
Oh, we can get tickets now. Okay.
Yes, it's all on my, my Instagram and Tweetar at Judy Gold, JEWDYGOLD, because I'm a Jew. And you can get tickets now. Pre-sales are great. And you can read the book. It's not the book, but it's based on the book.
Do you recommend reading the book before or after for people?
That's a good question. Eddie, do you recommend them reading the book before or after?
But why is Eddie in charge of all of this?
I don't know. I like his opinion, but then I just shut him down. I don't care what you have to say. He thinks if reading the book will get you see what the salient points are, but I don't know. I like it both ways. Like, you see the show and you're like, your interest is piqued, and then you read the book, which is much more detailed.
All right. Well, I don't have the kids, it turns out. We're juggling the schedule.
Who said I'm fucking inviting you and your Mormon girlfriend?
You don't have to invite me.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Sam. You are a very big star. And I have to say that when I go, I go on the road and I do gigs, and people all, without fail, mention the Majority Report. Like I heard you on the Majority Report. Isn't Sam an asshole? I only listen for when you're on. Like just stuff like that. But I try to defend you. But really, you have a lot of listeners.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you trying.
Yeah.
Judy Gold, always a pleasure.
I love
I'm gonna contact you and find out when I should come. I'm gonna come
you're
opening
coming.
night. I want to go
I want to come.
carpet.
Maybe not at
Emma,
the same
you
time
can
as Sam.
come.
Maybe we shouldn't go at the same time.
Why?
Yeah. Good. Create a riot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The paparazzi are going to be all over you too.
It's
Matt
crazy.
can come, but he's not wearing that fucking outfit. I mean, seriously, Matt, you know
People
you're going
can't
to be
see
on
Matt.
camera.
People can't see
they
Matt
don't
on
see
camera.
you?
No.
Why is Matt catching
only
strays?
I can see you?
Judy Gold.
Off camera, Judy.
Always,
sorry.
always a pleasure.
I love you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. I
George
love you too.
Santos, and go fuck yourself, Sarah Fuckabee Fuckface. All right.
All right.
Have a great